My boss said, "You're not leadership material." Then I secretly took over his role and doubled company profits. When my white boss told me I'd never have what it takes for leadership, I quietly documented every racist excuse while secretly running the operations that made him look successful. 6 months later, I was sitting in his corner office as the new VP, watching him clean out his desk after the board discovered he'd been stealing credit for my $16 million in hidden profits. But before I start, comment where you're tuning in from. And if this story has touched you, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Marcus Williams, and I'm 38 years old. Until 6 months ago, I was the Senior Operations Manager at Meridian Supply Chain Solutions in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'd been with the company for 8 years, working my way up from inventory coordinator to running the day-to-day operations of a $50 million logistics division. "You're just not leadership material, Marcus," my boss, Derek Hoffman, said during my annual review last March. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, like he was delivering profound wisdom. "You're great at the technical stuff, don't get me wrong. But leadership requires a certain presence, vision, the ability to inspire confidence in clients and stakeholders." I nodded and took notes, same as I always did. Derek had been making variations of this speech for 3 years running, ever since I'd applied for the assistant director position that eventually went to Brad Kellerman. A guy with half my experience, but what Derek called natural leadership qualities. Brad was white, naturally charming in meetings, and had gone to the same university as Derek. He also couldn't read a P&L statement to save his life. What Derek didn't know was that I'd been quietly documenting these conversations for years. Not because I planned to file complaints or make waves, but because I kept detailed records of everything. It's how my mind works. My grandmother used to say I was born with a filing cabinet for a brain. "Now don't get discouraged," Derek continued, his tone shifting to what he probably thought was encouraging. "You're valuable to this team. Really valuable. The clients trust you, the numbers are solid when you're handling them, but there's a difference between being good at operations and being ready for the C-suite." I maintained my expression, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. Inside, I was calculating. Our division had achieved 18% profit margins last quarter, while the company average was 11%. Client retention under my direct management was 94%. The cost optimization program I'd designed had saved the company $2.3 million in the previous fiscal year. "Maybe next time," Derek said, closing my file. "Keep doing what you're doing. The company needs people like you in the trenches. People like me." I filed that phrase away with all the others. After the meeting, I walked back to my office, the one tucked away in the corner, furthest from the executive floor, and opened my laptop. I had client retention reports to review, vendor negotiations to finalize, and a cost optimization analysis that Derek would present to the board next week as his own work. That's how it had always been. I did the analysis, Derek presented it. I solved the problems, Derek took the credit. I built the relationships with our major clients, but Derek was the one who played golf with them on weekends. When Hartwell Manufacturing's CEO mentioned me specifically during a satisfaction survey, Derek made sure to emphasize that I was one of his top guys in his report to the board. The pattern was so established that I'd stopped questioning it. This was simply how things worked. I didn't mind the arrangement, not really. The work mattered to me. Meridian handled supply chain operations for manufacturers across the Southeast, and when we did our job right, products moved efficiently, costs stayed low, and people kept their jobs. I was good at it, better than good, actually. Our division had the highest client satisfaction scores in the company and profit margins that made other departments look weak by comparison. But there was always that invisible ceiling, the one Derek reminded me of every time a leadership position opened up. Maybe next time, Marcus. You just need to work on your executive presence. The phrase executive presence had become a running joke among the few other black professionals in the company. We'd grab lunch and share stories about feedback that never quite made sense. Lacks gravitas. Doesn't command the room. Needs to work on strategic thinking. All code for the same thing. 3 months after that review, Derek announced he was taking a sabbatical. Burnout, he explained to the team during our Monday morning meeting. Need to recharge, spend time with family, maybe do some sailing. The company had approved a 6-month leave of absence, with the understanding that he'd return refreshed and ready to lead. I watched him pack his office, carefully removing the awards and recognition certificates that bore his name, but represented work I'd largely done. The Industry Innovation Award for our supply chain optimization model, the Client Service Excellence Recognition from our 3 largest accounts, the Cost Efficiency Commendation from the Board of Directors. Marcus, he said, stopping by my office the day before he left, you'll be acting manager while I'm gone. Try not to mess anything up too badly. He handed me a folder containing what he called essential information, mostly vendor contact lists and meeting schedules I'd already been managing for years. The board expects regular updates, he continued. I've set up weekly calls with Patricia Martinez. Just stick to the basics, numbers, client status, nothing too strategic. They're not expecting innovation, just maintenance. I assured him everything would be fine. What Derek didn't realize was that his sabbatical gave me something I'd never had before. Direct access to the executive team, client relationships, and strategic decision-making processes. For the first time in 8 years, there was no filter between my ideas and implementation. The first thing I noticed was how much time Derek had been wasting. Meetings that could have been emails, elaborate presentations for simple decisions, endless PowerPoints that said nothing substantial. He'd built a management style around looking busy rather than being effective. I started small, cut weekly status meetings from 2 hours to 30 minutes, eliminated redundant reporting requirements that were eating up my team's time, streamlined our vendor approval process from 6 weeks to 10 days. The results were immediate. Productivity jumped 15% in the first month. Client response times improved dramatically. My team, freed from Derek's micromanagement and pointless bureaucracy, started bringing me solutions instead of problems. You know, said Lisa Chen, one of our senior analysts, during a brief hallway conversation, it's amazing how much clearer everything feels now, like we can actually focus on the work instead of managing up constantly. I nodded, making a mental note. The phrase managing up was telling. Derek had trained all of us to spend significant time on activities designed to make him look good rather than activities that actually moved the business forward. But the real discovery came when I inherited Derek's access to the executive financial dashboard. What I found in Derek's executive access changed everything. For 5 years, Derek had been systematically underreporting our division's performance to the board. The numbers were all there, hidden in plain sight within the company's financial systems, but his presentations painted a completely different picture. Our division was generating 18% profit margins, but Derek reported them as 12%. Client satisfaction scores that ranked us in the top 5% of the industry, were characterized as good in his summaries. Growth projections were conservative enough to ensure he'd always exceed expectations, but low enough that the board never saw our true potential. I spent 3 nights going through 5 years of Derek's presentations, cross-referencing them with the actual data I'd been generating all along. The pattern was undeniable. Every metric was being deliberately undervalued. The most damning discovery came when I traced the financial flows. That $3.2 million in excess profits Derek had been hiding were being quietly redistributed to shore up losses in other divisions. Our success was subsidizing failures elsewhere in the company, and the board had no idea. I printed everything, made copies, stored backups in 3 different locations. Then I started making calls. Our biggest client, Hartwell Manufacturing, had been pushing for expanded services for years. Derek always said the margins wouldn't work, that we couldn't scale without compromising quality. I ran the numbers myself and found that wasn't true. We could expand their contract by 40% and still maintain our profit margins. "Marcus," said Tom Hartwell during our preliminary call, "I've been waiting for this conversation for 3 years. Derek kept saying you guys were at capacity, but from our end, it looked like you had room to grow." I flew to Atlanta the following week, met with their procurement team, and walked them through a proposal that would save them $800,000 annually while generating an additional $2.1 million in revenue for us. The presentation took 20 minutes. They signed the same day. "This is exactly what we needed," Tom said as we shook hands. "Derek always made expansion sound so complicated. You made it sound logical." By month 3, I'd secured 4 new major contracts and expanded relationships with existing clients. Our quarterly revenue was tracking 28% above Derek's projections. More importantly, our actual profit margins had improved to 22% through operational efficiencies that Derek had always claimed were impossible. The board started asking questions. My weekly calls with CEO Patricia Martinez shifted from status updates to strategic discussions. She wanted to understand how we were achieving these results, whether they were sustainable, and what resources we needed to maintain the momentum. "Marcus," she said during our 4th call, "the numbers coming out of your division are remarkable. How are you achieving these results?" I'd prepared for this moment. "These are the capabilities we've always had, Patricia. The difference is in how they're being managed and reported." "What do you mean by that?" "I think it would be better if I showed you in person," I replied. "Would you have time for a meeting next week?" There was a pause. "Actually, yes. And Marcus, bring documentation. Whatever you want to show me, I want to see the data behind it." I spent the weekend preparing a folder that would change everything. I met Patricia Martinez in her office on a Tuesday morning in late June. She was a sharp woman in her early 50s who'd built her career in operations before moving into executive leadership. I respected her because she understood the work, not just the financials. "Marcus," she said as I sat down, "before we start, I want you to know that the board has been discussing your performance. The turnaround in your division has been extraordinary." I handed her the folder I'd prepared. "Patricia, I need to show you something important." Inside were side-by-side comparisons of Derek's board presentations versus actual performance data going back 3 years, revenue projections compared to achieved results, profit margin reporting compared to financial statements, client satisfaction summaries compared to actual survey responses. She studied the documents, her expression growing more serious with each page. The silence stretched for nearly 10 minutes. Derek has been underreporting your division's performance, she asked finally. The data speaks for itself, I replied. I can walk you through the methodology if you'd like to verify the numbers independently. Patricia leaned back in her chair. Marcus, this suggests systematic misrepresentation of financial performance to the board. That's not just poor management. That's potential fraud. I remained calm, though my heart was racing. I'm not making accusations. I'm presenting facts that I believe the board should be aware of. She flipped through the pages again. These profit margins, if these numbers are accurate, your division has been subsidizing losses in other departments without board knowledge. That appears to be correct. Patricia closed the folder and looked at me directly. I need you to present this to the full board. Can you do that? Yes. And Marcus? Derek is scheduled to return from sabbatical in 2 weeks. I'm going to recommend we accelerate this timeline. That afternoon, Patricia called an emergency board meeting for the following Friday. Derek wasn't invited. I spent the next week preparing the most important presentation of my career. Not PowerPoint slides full of corporate buzzwords, but a comprehensive analysis of our operations, market opportunities, and strategic recommendations. I included testimonials from our major clients, performance metrics that could be independently verified, and a 3-year growth plan based on realistic capabilities rather than artificial constraints. Thursday evening, my phone rang. Derek's name appeared on the screen. Marcus, what the hell is going on? His voice was tight, controlled rage barely contained. Patricia called me about some emergency board meeting. What did you tell her? I told her the truth about our division's performance, I said calmly. You manipulated the numbers to make me look bad. Derek, I used the actual numbers, the ones you've been hiding from the board for years. Silence on the other end. You have no idea what you're doing, he said finally. When this blows up, and it will blow up, they'll remember who was really responsible for any success that division had. We'll see, I said, and hung up. That night, I reviewed my presentation one final time. Everything had led to this moment. 8 years of documentation, careful preparation, and patient work. Tomorrow, the board would see what Derek had been hiding. I felt no anger toward Derek, just cold clarity about what needed to happen next. Friday morning, July 15th. I stood outside the boardroom at Meridian's headquarters, holding a folder that contained 8 years of carefully documented work. Inside, 8 board members waited to hear what I had to say. Patricia opened the meeting with a brief introduction. As you know, Marcus Williams has been serving as acting director of our supply chain division during Derek Hoffman's sabbatical. The performance improvements during this period have been significant. Marcus has requested time to present his analysis of the division's operations and strategic potential. I stood at the head of the conference table, looking at faces I'd seen in company newsletters and annual reports, but had rarely interacted with directly. Robert Chen, our lead investor representative, Sarah Campbell from Audit and Compliance, Michael Torres, who oversaw operations across all divisions. Thank you for your time, I began. I want to discuss the supply chain division's actual performance versus reported performance, and what that means for the company's strategic planning. I handed out summary sheets I'd prepared, then turned to the wall display. The supply chain division has been operating at less than 60% of its potential, not due to market constraints or resource limitations, but due to systematic underutilization of our capabilities and misrepresentation of our results to this board. The room was silent as I walked through the data. 5 years of Derek's conservative projections compared to what we'd actually achieved. client satisfaction scores that ranked us industry-leading, reported as merely satisfactory. Revenue opportunities that had been dismissed as unfeasible, despite clear market demand. This quarter, I continued, operating under temporary management changes, the division achieved $4.2 million in new contract value, improved profit margins from 18% to 22%, and expanded our market presence into 2 new sectors. Robert Chen leaned forward. Mr. Williams, are you suggesting that the previous reporting was deliberately inaccurate? I'm presenting comparative data, I replied. I'll let you draw your own conclusions about intent. Sarah Campbell spoke up. These financial discrepancies, the profit margins being reported at 12% when actual performance was 18%. Where was that 6% differential being allocated? I had prepared for this question. Cross-divisional subsidies. The excess profits were being used to offset underperformance in other areas without board notification. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Michael Torres shuffled through his copy of the documents. Over 5 years, how much are we talking about? Approximately $3.2 million annually in unreported profit performance, I said. Total impact over 5 years approaches $16 million. For the next hour, I answered questions about methodology, market analysis, and strategic projections. I explained the operational changes I'd implemented, the client feedback I'd received, and the growth opportunities I'd identified. Patricia asked the question I'd been waiting for. Mr. Williams, what would you need to achieve the growth targets you've outlined here? Nothing we don't already have, I replied. The infrastructure exists, the client relationships exist, the market demand exists. We just need the authority to operate at full capacity instead of artificial constraints. The board asked me to step outside while they deliberated. I sat in the hallway for 45 minutes, reviewing my phone and trying to stay calm. When they called me back in, Patricia's expression was serious but not unfriendly. Marcus, the board has voted unanimously to offer you the position of Director of Supply Chain Operations, effective immediately. Derek's sabbatical is being converted to voluntary resignation. We're prepared to offer you a 35% salary increase, equity participation, and full operational autonomy. I accepted without hesitation. 2 hours later, a company-wide email announced my promotion. Derek called 20 minutes after that. The conversation was brief, tense, and final. 6 months after being told I wasn't leadership material, I was sitting in Derek's former office, reviewing quarterly reports that showed exactly what our division was capable of when properly managed. Revenue, $14.2 million, nearly double Derek's best year. Profit margins, 24%, industry-leading performance. Client retention, 98%, with 3 major contract expansions. Team productivity, up 34% since eliminating bureaucratic inefficiencies. The numbers told the story Derek had been hiding for years. My first major decision as director was expanding our team. We hired 12 new staff members, including 3 senior analysts who brought experience from our competitors. I also restructured our client management approach, assigning dedicated account managers to our top 15 relationships. It's amazing what happens when you're allowed to actually do the job, said Lisa Chen, who I'd promoted to assistant director. Everything Derek said was impossible turned out to be pretty straightforward. The promotion had ripple effects throughout the company. Other division heads started asking questions about their own reporting structures. The board implemented new oversight requirements for executive presentations. Patricia initiated a company-wide audit of financial reporting practices. During my second month as director, Tom Hartwell from our biggest client called with an interesting proposal. Marcus, we've been talking with some of our partners about your approach to supply chain optimization. Would you be interested in consulting for our sister company in Tennessee? It's a $3.8 million annual contract. I told him I'd need to clear it with the board, but yes, I was interested. Patricia not only approved the consulting arrangement, but suggested we formalize it as a new business unit. Marcus, you've proven that our capabilities extend beyond what we thought possible. Let's see how far we can take this. By the end of my first year as director, we'd expanded into 2 new markets, established the consulting division, and achieved profit margins that made our department the most profitable in the company. The board promoted me to Vice President of Operations, with oversight of 3 divisions instead of 1. At the company holiday party, Patricia pulled me aside. "I owe you an apology, Marcus," she said. "We should have recognized your capabilities years ago. Derek was obviously threatened by your competence." I nodded politely but didn't elaborate. What was the point? Derek had revealed exactly who he was, and I'd simply documented it carefully enough for others to see. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "The board wants to discuss creating a new executive position, Chief Operating Officer. We'd like you to consider it." The offer came with a substantial salary increase, full equity participation, and a seat on the board of directors. I accepted. Last month, Forbes published an article about supply chain innovation in mid-size companies. Our transformation was featured as a case study in Unleashing Hidden Potential Through Leadership Change. The article quoted Tom Hartwell. "The difference was night and day. Under previous management, everything seemed complicated and constrained. Marcus made growth look inevitable." This morning, I'm sitting in my office on the 42nd floor of Meridian's headquarters, reviewing expansion plans for our West Coast operations. The view overlooks downtown Charlotte, and I can see the building where I started as an inventory coordinator 9 years ago. My assistant knocks and enters with my daily briefings. "Mr. Williams, the Forbes interview is confirmed for this afternoon. Also, Harvard Business School called about the case study. They want to schedule a visit next month." I thank her and turn back to my computer. The Harvard case study is about leadership transitions and organizational change. They're particularly interested in how hidden capabilities can be revealed through different management approaches. Last week, I received a LinkedIn message from Derek. He'd taken a position as operations consultant with a smaller firm in Jacksonville, Florida. The message was brief. "Heard about your promotion to COO. Well played. No hard feelings." I didn't respond. Yesterday, one of Derek's former colleagues at our competitor mentioned that Derek's new company was struggling with client retention and profit margins. He keeps talking about innovative approaches, but the results aren't there, the colleague said during a networking event. It's like he never actually understood the operational side of the business. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek had spent years taking credit for work he didn't understand, and now he was trying to replicate success he'd never actually created. 3 weeks ago, Meridian's board approved my proposal for a new leadership development program focused on identifying and promoting operational talent from within the company. The program specifically targets high-performing professionals who may have been overlooked by traditional promotion pathways. "We need to make sure we don't miss the next Marcus Williams," Patricia said during the board meeting. "Talent like that is too valuable to waste." The program will launch next quarter, with funding for 12 participants annually. Sometimes I think about what Derek said during that review. "You're just not leadership material, Marcus." He was wrong about a lot of things, but he was especially wrong about that. Leadership isn't about presence or golf games or managing up to executives. Leadership is about understanding the work, respecting the people who do it, and having the competence to make decisions based on data rather than ego. It's about being prepared when opportunity finally arrives. My grandmother always said that success is just preparation meeting opportunity. She was right about that, like she was right about most things. She also used to say that some people mistake being loud for being strong, and mistake being busy for being effective. Derek gave me 6 months to prove what I was capable of. I used every day of it. The funny thing is, I never set out to take his job. I just did mine better than he thought was possible. Turns out that was enough. This afternoon, I have a call with our board about acquiring a supply chain consulting firm in Atlanta. The expansion would make us the largest independent supply chain operation in the Southeast. 5 years ago, Derek told me I lacked the vision for strategic thinking. Today, I'm building the future he never imagined was possible.